chair.
All right, good afternoon and welcome. This is the Trumpet's Evolution and Design and Repertoire, sorry. This is the Trumpet's Evolution Design and Repertoire presented by Gustavo Martinez Jr.
So this lecture recital is a presentation over my research the last 4 years as a trumpet major. To understand the modern day trumpet, we have to go back and look at the ancient early brass instruments. So I first want to point out the pictures up here are ancient brass instruments, but if you notice, none of them are brass. They're all made of shell or wood or bone. For an instrument to be considered brass, it doesn't have to be made of brass. It has to be produced sound by buzz of the lips. So, and that basically means is just a person would buzz their lips like this. And depending on how big the mouthpiece for the instrument is, that's the buzz that you would get. The first picture right here, you can see the first picture on the very left is what is a conch shell. It's one of the earliest brass instruments that we see and archaeologists kind of have found. It's conch shell, and it's just a shell that ancient civilizations and people would shave down to produce a mouthpiece-like structure so you could buzz into it. And we find shells that are shaved down so you could produce a buzz through there. The next picture is called the shofar. The shofar is an ancient horn that you would find. It's typically found from a ram's horn, and you can see there's a conical side where it's a lot larger and it goes to a lot smaller of a mouthpiece size. And that's where the horn would have been on the ram's horn or some sort of deer horn. And they would shave it down and then to produce a mouthpiece size. The next one is called the althorn. It's a little bit harder to find exactly where because it was made of wood, and it's basically just a very long piece of wooden pipe where they would have carved out a mouthpiece-like structure at the tip, and then it would open wider at the end, and it could be from here to that table where the trumpets are. So they were very large, and they were used for callings in the Swiss Alpines and kind of the European area as far as the 1600s. So, and they're still used today a lot during those traditions of the Swiss area there. And the last one is, on the furthest right, is a cornetto. The cornetto is kind of one of the earliest, or the most recent trumpets that we have. It's usually carved from a wood or bone, from some sort of animal or something, and they would carve holes into it, drill holes into it. And they would use those holes to cover up with their fingers, kind of like a clarinet, which there's discussions rooted from clarinet and clarion and how those have kind of tied together. But at the very tip, kind of see what the golden piece is. Now, of course, that's not what they looked like back then. They looked a little bit more rudiment in, not as shiny, but they would have the mouthpiece, and that's where you would buzz, and you would cover the holes with your fingers and produce different sorts of tones. Now, these instruments, when they're making them, they weren't really known as instruments. They were known as calls and horns, and they would be horns to blast the horns during war and traditions, like I said. But war is a very common one where you would, blast. Everyone knows the bugle call during military bands and things like that. But the these would typically be used for those situations, not necessarily music performance. But that's where the modern day trumpet derives from. The modern day trumpet is built on a harmonic series with all of these closed cylindrical pipes. These pipes are based on all of their sounds. Find my mouthpiece now. Based on all of their sounds, they work on a harmonic series where there's a fundamental note, and then you would go an octave above that to get their second note, and then a fifth above that, which is just intervals between the notes. So the fundamental note for C on trumpet doesn't really work. It's kind of impossible to play. But then you would go, basically, it's the C below the staff, which is your C below the staff, an octave above the fundamental, and then a fifth above that, and then a series of intervals above that, so it would be something like this. And I'm not changing any fingerings or changing the length of the instrument. I'm solely basing it off of that harmonic series that it works on. So, and that kind of hinders composers and trumpet players on what music they can play. So when you play it can go a little bit higher, which is kind of a flat 7, but you can still play it in the open partial, which you get back to your C octave. The trumpet, and that's kind of where you can see up there, only the fundamentals that you can work on. The trumpet that is known for only playing those is what we call the tromba, or the natural trumpet. You can see but in the Baroque and Renaissance era, famous composers would write for specifically the tromba, and that only could play these fundamental series. You can change the partial and the size of the instrument by adding something called crooks. I unfortunately don't have a natural trumpet, they're kind of hard to come by. You have to have crooks to change the key of whatever key you're in, and you can play a little bit more. If you think about orchestra playing and performing, they would have, the strings would kind of be playing this lyrical, beautiful melody, and usually the trumpet in the orchestra would only be playing a fanfaric-like attitude or something, and older music like in the Baroque era in the 1600s and the Renaissance before that. So that's typically what you would see during this time, is playing those sorts of melodies. They, like I said, they don't have any valves, they just work on that series, but they're able to play a few different notes because of the harmonic series they play on. Now, the famous piece that I'm going to play for you today is, sorry, I kind of skipped over myself. So typically when you perform these as a virtuosic solo instrument, you don't play them on the natural trumpet. You play them on what's called a piccolo trumpet, which is keyed a little bit different, but it's solely made so you can play this type of repertoire. Now, the piccolo trumpet has two pipes. It's a B flat keyed pipe and an A key pipe. The A key pipe is what I'm going to be playing today. You notice it also has 4 valves. And that mainly helps for intonation and tuning in separate notes, especially to get to a little bit lower of a harmonic. But like I said, if you want to come up here, like I said, the natural trumpet, to play any repertoire on that one, you would usually be playing it on the piccolo trumpet. So today, I'll be playing a piece from Henry Purcell. He is a Baroque composer who wrote for a lot of different arrangements of a lot of different orchestrations, choir, symphonies, and strings, and of course trumpet. But today I'll be playing Sonata, and you can see on your program, Sonata by Henry Purcell. And when they get cold, it's a little bit harder to perform on songs you play it. wasn't enough. So a man by the name of Anton Weidinger he created what's called the keyed trumpet. And if you hear keyed, usually you would typically think of the clarinet or saxophone with keys on them. And so this trumpet, called the keyed trumpet, if you can see, it's basically the natural trumpet, but they were able to drill holes and then make more additions to it where you would push kind of a key and it would lift open one of the valves and you could change the partials, which was completely revolutionary to the trumpet playing. This instrument by Anton Weidinger was created in the early 1800s, and which is around the same time of Joseph Haydn. And basically, Haydn heard this instrument and was like, "This is revolutionary. I'm gonna write a concerto for it." So, and that's where we get the Haydn trumpet concerto. This is one of the most famous staples in trumpet repertoire in popularity because of the chromatic sequences in it. Because before that, they could never do that because they never have valves. And I'll get into valves a little bit when I get to the B-flat trumpet. So today, I'll be performing the Haydn trumpet concerto, which is keyed in E-flat, just the same as the keyed trumpet, which is what I'll be playing on typically an E-flat trumpet. Also used in military brass bands and things like that too. John Philip Sousa is another famous composer to write for E-flat trumpet as well. But today I'll be performing the Haydn trumpet. So, as the Haydn concerto is a staple, like I said, it's a trumpet repertoire. And like I said, it changed what composers would play. And this recital is based off of the design of the trumpet and how the design affected the repertoire, vice versa. Sorry. And so, after the Haydn concerto, everyone started writing new concertos, and they completely changed the game into trumpet concertos. As well as Haydn, Hummel is another famous composer who wrote for the E-flat trumpet or the keyed trumpet, where you would typically play it on the E-flat trumpet. And it also became an extremely popular staple into trumpet repertoire. after this, after the trumpet became available to perform more and more advancements came to it in the brass and metal world. And that usually you can derive that from the really wars that go on and advancements into war and weapons and things like that. Musicians and trumpet, brass players would kind of be like, okay, I'm going to use this new advancement in technology and make it into music. And so after the Byzantine Empire and the Mesopotamian Empire developing into really the Bronze Age, starting new metal manufacturing, and the trumpet is really where it started developing. So only in the recent a few hundred years, the trumpet added valves, and the valves were really what changed the trumpet into what makes it very precise and very comfortable to play, rather than, and actually it makes it sounds nicer to listen to too. So, and the valves were an addition from the same thing as in boat manufacturing and valves and piston and rotors and things like that, and machinery. So then composers on the repertoire side would start writing for more and more advanced trumpet models and more advanced trumpet pieces for advanced trumpet models of the trumpet being made. And the last piece I'll be performing today is by Paul Hindemith, Trumpet Sonata, and it was written in 1939. Does anybody have any idea what was going on in 1939? Oh, sorry, one more thing, it was in German. So I hope that reflects, and you'll really notice what's kind of the piece, the attitude of the piece, reflecting on when and where it was written. So this is the Trumpet Sonata by Paul Hindemith. can see the repertoire that's kind of in front of you and understand how that piece compared to the rest of the pieces are a complete advancement into those. And there's Paul Henneman, I forgot that, sorry. Let me go one more thing. The trumpet has been very, very evolved over the last thousands of years in the brass world. So hopefully you can see by the repertoire chosen and by the repertoire that's being changed and created now that the manufacturing of it is also very important to what the repertoire is being chosen for. So thank you. Thank you very much. My school email, my personal email is up there, and also my website is another way you can contact me through my Trumpet website. So if anybody has any questions, I'd love to have a discussion as well.
Could you maybe explain more, especially some people here who are not trumpet players, develop more the reason for valves, tell them how Rex and makes all these different trumpets.
So before valves, we had the natural trumpet, really is the main one, and then the key trumpet. But in the natural trumpet, it could only be played in like what I was showing earlier was that harmonic series that had just those fundamental notes. So that really is a very, very limited to what composers could be writing to. And so they made advancements and to the key trumpet. The key trumpet was able to change more harmonics and notes to open up a more harmonic series for the trumpet. And that because of the pipe that it's of the harmonic series that it's designed to. The valves was such an advancement because it opened up to where instead of playing one key, which is usually D or F sharp major, I can't remember, but instead of being just one key and then having to put a crook to make a new key, it plays all 12 keys. So you can play it, it's a chromatic instrument now. It's the main reason why valves are so important to trumpet playing. Being chromatic.
Yeah, can you explain a little bit further, what actually the piston is doing?
Yes.
To create a different set of pipes, right?
Okay, yes, that's a great question. The trumpet is one pipe that's a certain distance long. The valves open up and close the distance of that pipe. So how long the instrument is, so if you remember the alp horn in the earlier with the long wooden, it's a little bit deeper because of how big long the instrument is. The trumpet is, I think it's maybe 8 feet long total, and it's kind of coiled up, but the valves change that harmonic series, but it also changes the length of the trumpet, if that makes sense. Any other questions or any topics or anything? Yes.
I think that was really illuminating. I thought it was very interesting that you, particularly when you introduced the key trumpet, you went straight to an early adopter among composers and said, okay, this technical advancement, a lot of different kind of composition. And then when you went to the valve trumpet, you chose something really modern, right, from this guy knows, by the way, from 39. It had been a while. Is there a reason that you kind of skipped into the middle of the life of valve trumpet?
Yes, there is, and that's actually something I probably should have talked about. That's a great question. The Hindemuth Sonata the time it was written was very important, but it's also very important to trumpet repertoire in the first place. The reason why it's so captivating as a trumpet player is because of the notes that you kind of play, if that makes sense. So most of the time, notes you play, if you remember when the Saints go marching in, pretty simple major key that makes sense. The Hindemuth Sonata is pretty atonal, and Paul Hindemuth was a composer. He wrote a sonata and a concerto for every single instrument, and he could also play every single instrument. And if you ask Ms. Law here, it's not the E, it's the hardest trumpet piano part that you're going to see. So the piano being such a very intricate, difficult part compared to a trumpet part that also does not make any sense is why it's so important. if that really clears it up. But the reason why I kind of skipped, there's a few centuries of the valve trumpet being adapted into jazz, into modern and pop and culture and commercial music is huge in there. And being versatile was really important, but I really wanted to choose a classical piece because the rest were classical. And this piece is also, just signifies a very interesting piece of music at an interesting time.
So I guess does that sort of condense to, that's a piece that really shows something you can only do with the valve trumpet and you couldn't do with the others?
Yes.
Was there some transition, before that, in the late Romantic period, was there something different about trumpets or?
So they were also being used for, in the Romantic era isn't a really popular time for trumpet because keyboard and crazy, the atonal and the 12 note series were also being kind of created then. And so in popularity, it's more popular for keyboard instruments and really orchestra instruments and things like that. The trumpet, there's the Sine concertino, which is really important. I played it for my senior recital. That is also very. It's really not well known, but it's one of the most interesting trumpet concertinos that you'll see. Henry Sine is a Flemish composer in the early 1800s as well, but maybe like the later part of the 1800s, sorry, but that piece isn't so popular because of everything else I think that was going on. So it kind of like took a break for a little bit, and there's probably some more popular repertoire in the 1800s than this Sine, but it really was an advancement into this atonal work by Paul Hindemith. So his piece he made his own series of notes, like his own scale grid system, if that makes sense, that never had been done before. And then he wrote a piece for trumpet. So that's why trumpet players always like the Hindemith, because it's one of the most advancements into what we can play, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Yes.
So I know you probably have most experience playing the modern trumpet. It's probably what you're most comfortable with. But out of the others, do you have one that you particularly enjoy?
Out of the one sitting over there, probably the piccolo trumpet. But I mainly like the repertoire that the piccolo trumpet can play, so that's why it's a lot more fun. Do you have a question?
What would you say is the next step then, if it keeps on evolving?
That's a great question, and someone actually mentioned that earlier. So, a lot of times in history, people will have music and they'll write music, and then we'll be at a point in history in like the 1600s, and they'll say there's nothing else that they can do. There's no more music that can be made, and obviously that's not true. I would love to see the trumpet being made, manufactured to play microtonally and play microtonal tunes. That could, or pieces that you can also be written for, because that would open doors endlessly. Because I think that you can simplify music into 12 notes, but then if you really start looking into those 12 notes, it starts getting very complicated. So, and then because in between those notes, there's microtonal notes where you can kind of bend the pitch into 2 pitches, have like infinite number of pitches. So I would love to see a trumpet, maybe it's one like this, but it has 6 valves or 7 valves, or 8 valves that you can play that plays microtonally, but because that would also open doors for repertoire being written for a microtonal trumpet. So. Any other questions? I saw one more. Well, thank you all. Music theory videos, trumpet videos, and things like that on there. Free Google Classroom for trumpet lessons. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Thank you.
Come over here.